right at my son's wedding. When snow covered the steps in white and everyone was clapping while the cake was being cut, a stranger moved close to me and whispered, "Your wife will need this tonight. Don't let your daughter-in-law see it." He slipped a cold USB drive into my pocket, then disappeared. I turned back. Kathleen was laughing, and Molly was smiling, a little too perfectly. In that moment I understood the paradox of happiness. The brightest place is often where the truth hides the deepest. Before this story goes any further, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. As for me, I'm going back to the very first moment. The moment I stepped into the waiting room and began to realize that this wedding was not as ordinary as it looked. I kept the USB in my jacket pocket for the rest of the ceremony, as if it might speak up on its own if I let my guard down. The reception hall was bright. Glasses clinked, making that cheerful sound I had heard for decades at parties just like this. Connor stood tall. He wore the practiced smile of a man who had learned how to convince others that he was doing just fine. Molly stood beside my son. Her white dress was neat and precise. Her eyes were sharp, as if she had already measured every distance in the room. I did not look for the stranger again. The snow outside the entrance grew thicker, and I knew there are things you should not chase in the middle of a crowd busy celebrating. Kathleen took my hand. That hand had led me through long winters in Montana, through failures and repairs, through years when everything required time. Today her hand was warm, but it trembled slightly. She smiled more than usual. She repeated questions she had already asked, and I answered slowly the way I always do so she would not feel confused. I glanced at Molly. Her eyes passed over my jacket pocket for a brief beat, just long enough for me to notice the calculation that did not feel out of place beneath the music. The party went on. Carefully prepared speeches, well-timed congratulations, applause on cue. I heard my name mentioned, the ideal father, the one who built the foundation. Polite phrases people use when they do not plan to ask too much. I nodded in return. The USB pressed against me when I sat down. Metal against my chest. Cold. Solid. I wondered how the stranger knew the exact moment, the exact place, and the exact fear to use. At one point, Molly came closer and offered to take Kathleen to freshen up. I saw my wife's wrist resting in my daughter-in-law's hand, a grip just firm enough to guide. Kathleen looked back at me, that familiar questioning look. I smiled to reassure her. That smile, I had practiced it for years, strong enough to keep silence when needed. As they walked away, I noticed a server standing near the door. His posture was stiff. His eyes were not on the tray of drinks. I had worked with machines my whole life. I could tell when something did not belong where it was standing. Time moved slowly. Outside, the wind struck the glass, a steady murmur as if reminding us that winter here does not care about anyone's schedule. I excused myself into the hallway. The lighting was softer. The familiar scent of old wood from the manor hung in the air. I touched my jacket pocket again, making sure the USB was still there. The stranger had said tonight. Not now. Not tomorrow. A precise reminder, as if measured by the clock of someone who knew this house's rhythm well. I stopped in front of a family photograph on the wall. Kathleen and me when we were young. Connor still small, smiles that did not yet know fatigue. I remembered the land behind the manor, the paths only I still remembered. I remembered carefully closed doors, meant to protect what should not be displayed. And I remembered a name, Liam, a man who once worked underground, a man who understood that the deeper something is buried, the more it needs the right light, at the right time. When I returned to the hall, Molly stood at the center, raising her glass. She spoke about family, about the future, about the necessary things to protect one another. Each word flowed by carefully weighed. I saw Kathleen sitting in the front row, nodding along with the rhythm. For a moment, fatigue crossed her face, then vanished. I did not blame her. Some kinds of exhaustion do not come from age, but from someone changing a rhythm that once felt natural. After the dance, I took Kathleen back to the room early. I said the wind was cold. I said she needed rest. Molly smiled in understanding, nodding a bit faster than necessary. Connor patted my shoulder, said everything had been taken care of. I replied that I was used to handling things myself. That was the only truth I said out loud that evening. In the room, I helped Kathleen take off her coat. She asked me what day it was. I answered, then sat beside her until her breathing became steady again. I did not rush. I knew time itself is a kind of lock. Opened at the right moment, it preserves what still remains. When I stood up, I turned off the light, leaving just enough glow to recognize a familiar face. I stepped into the hallway and closed the door softly out of habit. At the far end, I saw a figure pass by, not the stranger from earlier, but one of the staff. They avoided my eyes. I did not call out. I did not ask. Some questions only make doors close tighter. I returned to my small study, a room few had entered in recent years. An old wooden desk, the computer I still used to store what needed keeping. I sat down and took out the USB. The metal reflected the yellow light. No label, no markings. I placed it on the desk and took a long breath. Outside, the wind grew stronger, as if the entire manor was listening. Before touching it, I thought of Kathleen, of her smile slipping slightly out of rhythm tonight. I thought of Molly, of that quick glance and the smile that was too perfect. I thought of the whisper hidden beneath applause. And I understood something. The party had ended the moment the USB touched my pocket. Everything after that was just ceremony. I plugged the USB in, and the room fell silent in a very different way. The screen came to life slowly, as if the machine itself needed time to consider what was about to be exposed. There were no familiar folders, no shocking video clips like people imagine, just a blank, minimalist interface with an access request I had seen before. 3 years earlier, at the family's old silver mine, I recognized it instantly, not by how it looked, but by how it waited in silence. A decryption program, removed from the security system after a so-called technical incident, quickly documented, then quietly closed. I did not rush to click anything. I sat still, listening to the wind outside the window. The snowstorm had arrived right on schedule, blurring every road leading out. Cell service weakened, then disappeared. In that moment, the manor felt like an isolated island, and I understood why the word tonight mattered. I entered the old password, not because I remembered every character, but because my hands still remembered the habit. The interface opened. A timeline appeared. Time blocks removed from the mine's security cameras. I scrolled. 1:15 in the morning, a familiar date. I clicked. The sound came first, before any image. A low, steady voice, very much like mine, too much like mine. Each sentence stitched together with care, breathing patterns replicated perfectly. If I were not familiar with the truth, I would have believed it was me. But I know my voice. When I am tired, when I hesitate, when I choose silence. This recording had none of those pauses. It was too perfect, like a key cut by a machine. Then the image appeared. A corridor inside the mine, cold lighting. I saw a figure bending down in front of a temporary medicine cabinet. A white dress, quick, efficient movements. Molly. She swapped the medication, placed it back exactly where it belonged, with the confidence of someone who had practiced many times. I focused on the label. No expertise was needed to understand. The dosage was different, a small change, but enough to slow memory's rhythm, enough to make a question disappear the moment it was asked. I leaned back in my chair. Everything clicked together in a way that sent a chill through me. The mornings when Kathleen seemed more tired. The afternoons when she lost the thread of a story. The papers signed with the explanation. Just a formality. There was no loud scene, no crude trace, just a series of small adjustments. Patient, methodical, breaking things from the inside. There was a knock at the door, even, unhurried. I had not yet turned off the screen when Molly's voice came through, gentle, the same tone she used when raising a glass. "Dad, are you still awake?" I locked the screen, pulled out the USB, and placed it in the drawer. I did not answer right away. I stood up and walked slowly, so the person outside would understand. I was not being rushed. Molly stepped in. The hallway light reflected on her face, revealing nothing. Connor followed behind her, quieter than usual. The room suddenly felt smaller. Molly glanced at the computer, then back at me. "I just want to make sure Kathleen is resting well," she said. "It's been a long night." "I know," I replied. "Every long night leaves a mark." Connor shifted his feet slightly. I saw the pressure in his shoulders, not the worry of a son, but the weight of numbers that no longer balanced. Molly continued moving past the silence. "There are things that need to be arranged early," she said, "to avoid misunderstandings. especially paperwork. I looked straight at her. Paperwork doesn't sign itself, I said. It needs memory. A moment passed. Then Molly exhaled. Her smile dropped like a mask set down on a table. You're smart, she said. So I'll be direct. The silver mine is no longer a mine. It's storage. Data. And our family is standing on top of it. Connor looked at me as if asking permission to explain. I raised my hand. Not high. Just enough to hold the rhythm. Go on, I said. Molly talked about unnamed contracts. About servers that needed silence. About the value of a place no one would suspect. She spoke about protecting the family by legalizing control. And then she said the last thing. No decoration. No softening. Kathleen didn't become forgetful naturally, she said. I just adjusted things. There were no harsh words. None were needed. The truth stood there, straight, cold. Connor lowered his head. I didn't have a choice, he said, his voice breaking. The debts kept piling up. I just wanted to keep everything. I looked at them. 2 young people, standing in my old room believing everything could be arranged, like a spreadsheet. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I thought of Kathleen sleeping next door, her memory stretched by someone else's design. The storm will keep us here, Molly said, almost as a reminder. Tonight everything can be wrapped up neatly. I nodded as if agreeing. Yes, I said. Tonight will end. They left. Behind them a faint trace of perfume and a thick silence. I locked the door. I opened the drawer and took out the USB. Inside it was not just evidence. It was time. I checked the clock. 1:15 in the morning had passed. I knew the next step could not be direct confrontation. Not yet. I went into Kathleen's room. She slept peacefully, her breathing steady. I sat down and held her hand. We're going for a walk, I whispered, soft enough not to break the thread of her sleep. I stood up and gathered my coat, my keys, the things I always kept where they belonged. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks. Beneath the snow, old paths were waiting. I had closed them once to protect my family. Tonight I would open them again. Not to run away, but to carry the truth to where it needed to be heard. I closed Kathleen's door with a practiced motion so light the hinges made no sound. Outside, the hallway stretched long and empty. Yellow lights cast overlapping shadows. I didn't rush away. I stood there for a few beats listening, not for footsteps, but to be sure the silence still belonged to me. Molly had been right about one thing. The snowstorm kept everyone inside. But she forgot something. People who live long in Montana learn to walk through storms the way they learn to breathe. I took the side staircase, the one rarely used at night. Wind slipped through a glass seam, pushing a thin sheet of ice across the stone floor. I pulled my coat tighter, feeling the USB in my pocket like an anchor, keeping my heartbeat from drifting too far. In the lower hall, I saw them. Connor and Molly stood with a group of staff I had noticed earlier. No one looked directly at me. They didn't need to. We all understood our roles had shifted. I stopped at a distance close enough to be seen and said calmly, I'm taking Kathleen out for some air. She isn't used to the noise. Molly nodded, a little too quickly. Connor avoided my eyes. One person stepped forward half a pace, then stopped when Molly signaled. Her control wasn't loud. It lived in very small nods. I turned away without waiting for an answer. Some requests are only formalities. Outside the storm buried the steps in snow. Yard lights cut through the blowing flakes, turning them into broken white streaks. I moved around to the west side of the manor where the ground sloped and old pine trees broke the wind. Kathleen walked slowly, holding my arm. I talked about the cold, about going back in soon. She nodded, trusting me the way she had for decades. We didn't head for the main road. I turned into a narrow path where an old metal door sat low beneath the snow line. I took out the key and turned it at the right rhythm. The door opened. Damp earth rushed out, that familiar scent from years when I went deep underground to fix what others didn't want to touch. Kathleen stopped looking into the darkness. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere warmer, I said. I switched on the flashlight. The beam cut through snow clinging to the steps. We went down carefully, one step at a time. The door closed behind us. The storm stayed on the other side. The old mine tunnels opened up like a long memory. Turns marked with paint lines only I still understood. I guided Kathleen close to the wall where the ground was steadier. Her breathing evened out. The tension in her eyes eased once the wind stopped striking her face. I thought of Molly, of how she spoke about a clean ending, and I understood. Clean is often just what people call it when they close a door before anyone can ask questions. Footsteps echoed behind us. Not close, but clear. I switched off the flashlight in one motion and pulled Kathleen into a rock recess. Another beam swept past, slid across the wall, then disappeared. I heard Connor's voice more urgent than usual. "Dad, stop. I just want to talk." I turned the light back on and stepped out. "Talk here," I said. "Less wind." Connor appeared at the bend, holding something that looked like medical equipment. Not made to cause noise, but to make someone stop. I didn't move forward. I didn't step back. I stood in front of Kathleen, close enough for her to feel safe. "I did this to save the family," Connor said. "If I didn't, everything would collapse." "A family isn't a balance sheet," I replied. "It can't survive quiet adjustments." Molly stood behind Connor, her eyes calm to the point of cold. "You always think you understand every path," she said. "But times have changed. Not every path I answered, just the ones old enough to be left out of other people's plans." I turned left to a low iron door coated in dust. I unlocked it. Inside was a small, dry room. An iron box sat against the wall. I pulled it out. The lid opened, revealing original documents sealed tight, along with carefully preserved samples. Things that need time to be forgotten, but never disappear. I looked at Molly. "You're late," I said. "I've kept this since before you learned how to smile at the right moment." Connor stared into the box. His shoulders dropped. Molly was silent for a beat, a rare thing. Then she smiled. Thin, brief. "You think bringing this into the light is enough?" she asked. "I don't think," I said. "I act." I took out the USB and placed it beside the iron box. "The truth doesn't need to run," I continued. "It just needs a place to stand." Connor looked at Kathleen. She was looking at him, her eyes caught between recognition and distance. Something shifted in him. The device in his hand lowered. "I didn't want her like this," he said, his voice breaking. "I was just cornered." "Being cornered doesn't give you the right to push someone else," I said, "especially the one who built the paths for you." Molly took a step forward, then stopped when Connor raised his arm. Control changed direction without a word. I closed the box and held it close. "We're going back," I said. "There are people who need to hear this." Wind hissed through cracks in the rock, distant and dull. I led Kathleen first. Connor followed. Molly came last. A new order formed without explanation. Down there beneath the ground, I saw clearly what the party above had hidden. When the lights are dimmed enough, the truth has nowhere left to hide. We went deeper, leaving the familiar stretch behind and stepping into branches with fewer footprints. I kept our pace slow, not because I was tired, but because a slower rhythm helps people think clearly. Kathleen held onto my arm. Her breathing steadied as the air became more stable. Connor followed his steps, uncertain. Molly kept her distance. She didn't say another word. Her silence now weighed more than any justification ever could. The flashlight swept over old numbers on the walls. Directional marks I had painted years ago. I stopped at a narrow junction. "We split up," I said, without looking at Molly. "Connor goes with his mom. You come with me." I didn't wait for agreement. Connor nodded as if he'd just been given what he needed most. A clear task. We separated in silence. I led Molly down the left passage. Not deep, but winding. She understood the intent. Her eyes flicked quickly, measuring distance. "You think keeping me here is smart?" she asked. "I think keeping the truth close is necessary," I replied. "Whether it's smart or not, time will decide." We took a few more dozen steps when metal struck stone behind us. Connor had dropped something. I stopped and turned. Molly stopped too. In that brief moment, I noticed the fatigue in her posture. Not fear, but disappointment. A plan no longer holding its shape. I opened a low door and stepped into the old control room. Stripped circuit boards left bare metal frames. On the wall hung the mine's broadcast system. Unused for years, but still intact. I set the iron box on the table, pulled out the USB, plugged it into a backup storage unit I had left behind long ago. I didn't need a network. I needed sound and image to reach the right place. Molly leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice thin. "Letting people hear," I said. "Not to punish, but to finish this." Rapid footsteps echoed outside the door. Connor appeared pale. Kathleen followed, supported by him. "They're locking the upper passages," Connor said. "The staff." I nodded. "Then we don't go out," I replied. "We stay. And we speak." I powered up the system. A low hum filled the room, then settled. I selected the channel linked to the main hall. The screens up there were playing moments from the reception. I took a slow breath. No introduction was needed. I played the first clip. Molly switching the medication. No background music. Just the truth standing still. Then the AI recording began. My voice. Clear. Even. Too perfect. I stopped it halfway. "That's enough," I said. I moved on to the documents. Timestamps. Signatures. Small adjustments. I didn't explain much. I let the pieces find each other. A moment later, noise drifted down from above. Muffled. But enough to know the hall was waking up. Molly took a step forward, then stopped when Connor raised his hand. "Don't," he said. "I'm tired." Kathleen looked at the small screen in the room. Then she looked at me. "Patrick," she said, her voice slow but steady. I remember. One word. Enough to open more doors than any key ever could. I shut down the system here, leaving it to keep playing upstairs. "We wait," I said. "No one needs to run." Time passed with our breathing. The wind faded in the distance as if the storm had accepted defeat against the rock. After a while, an iron door sounded down the corridor. Not rushed. Light swept through the gap. I didn't step forward. I didn't step back. I stood beside Kathleen. Molly sat down on a chair. "For the first time all night." "You've won," she said, not looking at anyone. "No," I replied. "The truth has just found a place to stand." Connor lowered his head. "I'll stay," he said. "I won't run." I placed my hand on his shoulder. Light. Enough to pass on something I'd learned long ago. Some decisions don't erase consequences, but they stop them from spreading. We sat there a while longer until the footsteps outside became clearer, more orderly. When the door opened, I met their eyes. I didn't need names. I said one thing. "Everything that needed to be heard has been heard." They nodded. I didn't ask anything else. I turned to Kathleen. "We're going home," I said. On the way back, I locked the tunnel entrance behind us. Not to hide anything, but to close a chapter. Above the hall, lights were still on, not brilliant anymore. Just bright enough to see one another. And for me, that was enough. We returned to the manor when dawn was near. The storm had weakened, leaving a thin layer of snow along the paths, as if the long night had never been angry at all. The lights in the main hall were still on, but no one was raising a glass anymore. The large screens were dark, reflecting only cold, fogged windows. I walked slowly, not because I was tired, but because I wanted everything to settle back into place like a room after every drawer has been opened. Kathleen sat down in her familiar armchair. I made tea the kind she had liked for many years. Her hands no longer shook like they had earlier that night. When I set the cup down, she looked at me longer than usual, then smiled. "I remember the road to the west," she said, "and the metal box." I nodded. No more needed to be said. Some memories only need not to be pushed aside. They find their own way back. Connor stood at the doorway, his shoulders relaxed like someone who had just put down a weight heavier than he expected. He said he would stay to handle things the right way, that he needed time. I did not ask how long. Time was not something I could decide for him. I only said, "Stay when you need to. Leave when you're ready." He nodded. His eyes were red, but he looked straight at me. Molly was no longer there. Not because she disappeared, but because the story had reached a point where she no longer needed to stand at the center. What needed to be revealed had been revealed. The doors that needed to be closed were closed quietly, without display. Order was simply returned to where it belonged. Morning came slowly. Weak sunlight broke through the clouds, reflecting off the snow in soft patches of light. I opened the window a little, letting the clean, cold air drift in. Kathleen closed her eyes and took a deep breath like someone returning to an old home after a long journey. I sat beside her without speaking. This silence was not avoidance. It was the reward for having said enough. The days that followed passed steadily. Kathleen stopped taking the medication that slowed everything down. Her memory did not return like a door swinging open, but like a dimmer switch, brighter each day. She remembered the names of the flowers by the porch. She remembered the wooden chair that creaked softly when you sat down. She remembered where I always put my keys. Each time she remembered something new, I did not show surprise. I simply acknowledged it like someone who understands that when the current stabilizes, the system balances itself. The manor returned to its normal rhythm. Rooms were set back in order. Papers were sorted properly. The old silver mine was secured in a different way, not to hide it, but to protect it. I left the broadcast system there. It was off but ready. Some things no longer need to be used. They only need to exist to remind us that light always finds a path. One afternoon, Kathleen pulled me out onto the porch. The snow had melted in places, revealing dark earth beneath. She held my hand and spoke slowly. "Family is not the photo taken on a wedding day." I smiled. She continued, "It's the person who stays after the photo is put away." I nodded. I had lived long enough to understand that, but hearing it from her carried a different weight. Connor stopped by before leaving. He hugged Kathleen, then looked at me. "I'll start over," he said. "Not fast, but right," I replied. "Right is enough." He left his steps lighter than when he arrived. I watched until his car disappeared behind the trees. That evening, Kathleen and I sat in the living room, under warm, yellow light. I read the paper. She knitted a scarf. The knitting needles touched with a soft, steady sound, a rhythm I had known for years. I thought about the snowy night, about the cold USB in my coat pocket, about the whisper beneath the applause. I did not resent the past. It had done its job, pushing everything to the edge so the truth would have room to stand. Before bed, Kathleen asked me, "What if there had been no USB?" I answered honestly. "The truth would still be there. It just would have arrived later." She nodded as if accepting that some trains do not run on time, but they still arrive. I turned off the light. Outside, the wind was gentle. The house was quiet in a comforting way. I thought about the final lesson that long night had left behind, not about money or control, but about blood and honesty. Family is not the people standing together under bright lights. It is the people willing to walk with you through the darkest paths to open the door at the right moment. Money can build a mansion, but only truth can hold the roof in place. Thank you for staying with this story until its final moments. If this story touched you, please tap like to support us, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future stories, and share this video with people you care about. Every interaction you give is motivation for us to continue bringing meaningful, honest, and deeply